the head of the European Union warning of potential countermeasures. Well, to get the latest from there, we can cross now live to our correspondent, Dave Keating, who's outside the EU Commission for us. Dave, what reaction are we now expecting from that European Union, to negotiate or to strike back? How do you see it?
Well, in terms of these new Liberation Day tariffs that were announced last week, they're still trying to negotiate. Of course, the hope was that before today came, the Trump administration would back off and not impose the tariffs. I should say there is still hope here in Brussels. They saw what happened with Canada and Mexico in previous rounds where their tariffs took effect and then were rescinded. So even though these 20% tariffs are taking effect today, they're still hoping that something can be worked out in the next days. Now, the EU has drawn up a list of products for retaliatory tariffs. That list has been finalized and will be put to a vote today by national governments. From what I hear, there shouldn't be any opposition to that. However, that is actually a retaliation for the steel and aluminium tariffs of a month ago, which were 25%. Those retaliatory tariffs were actually delayed because national governments started to get nervous. And so actually what we're going to see adopted today isn't a response to last week's blanket tariffs of 20%, rather the previous round. Now, this list seems to be weighted toward products that would hurt Trump politically the most. Most notably, soybeans are going to have a huge tariff on them. Those come largely from Louisiana, the home state of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. But you also see a lot of products specifically coming from Republican voting states. Now, these tariffs are going to come in two rounds. The first will be next week, April 15th, a small amount of it affecting orange juice, products like that. The larger impacts, including the actual steel and aluminium, the actual retaliation, will be next month, May 15th. That list was shortened from when it was originally proposed a month ago. It was supposed to be on 26 billion euros worth of goods. Now it's something around 23 billion euros worth of goods. It's really nothing compared to the 380 billion euros worth of goods that the Commission says will be impacted by the 20% across the board tariff taking effect today. So today's move can't really be seen as a retaliation for what happened last week. It's a delayed retaliation for before. When it comes to last week, the Commission is still weighing its options, and it does have a lot of options that could hurt the U.S. really bad, most notably if they decide to trigger the nuclear option, which is tariffing U.S. services imports. So the U.S. has a trade deficit with the EU when it comes to goods, but it has a trade surplus when it comes to services, a huge surplus. Services being video streaming online, financial services, anything that you can't hold in your hand, social media. So right now the big debate is whether or not they should tariff those activities, particularly financial services, could really hurt the U.S. But of course it would also have a blowback effect. There is a huge debate roiling here in Brussels about whether that's a good idea. I don't expect any decision on that anytime soon, because the message we keep hearing from the European Commission behind me is that they want to negotiate. They have come out with this announcement on Monday saying that they would offer 0% tariffs on industrial goods. That didn't really impress the Trump administration because that's 1.6% tariffs. What the Trump administration is lashing out at is the trade deficit, actually. And anyway, that offer for 0% tariffs has technically been on the table for years, and particularly in the past months. So right now the EU is holding its fire. It is not responding yet to this 20% across the board tariff.
Okay, but it does have some arsenal, if you like, in its rooms, though it did take quite a while to come up with this small reply to that smaller amount of taxes a month ago. Briefly, Dave, the EU also is saying that, well, it can just turn away from the US market. Is that, just trying to call a bluff on Washington?
Yes, I mean, that's what all countries are saying. China is saying that as well. And actually, yesterday we had a phone call between EU President Ursula von der Leyen and the Chinese Premier specifically about how to avoid dumping of products from China. So that would be products that Chinese companies were intending to export to the United States. Many will now be diverted, and a lot will come here to the European Union. And if they all get dumped onto the market, that could be a major problem. So the Commission is setting up emergency measures right now to watch for that dumping. And if they see it happening with certain products, they'll put in policies to stop the flow of those products. But they want to work with China on preventing that from happening. A very interesting readout yesterday. from that call between the EU leader and the Chinese leader, talking about cooperation to uphold the global trading order. Of course, the U.S. has been pressuring the EU to adopt an aggressive stance against China for the past years. The EU has largely complied, but now with the U.S. adopting an aggressive stance toward the EU, we're seeing the EU and China growing closer together. Yesterday's call was an illustration of that, and the EU does have options to increase its trade with China, with India, with Brazil, with all kinds of countries. Even the past couple of days, I've heard people saying the EU should quickly drop its sanctions on Russia because the U.S. is abandoning them, which is an interesting take. So certainly the EU has other options here, and that remains a threat that they can say to the U.S., look, everyone is just going to stop exporting to you unless you drop these global tariffs.
David Keating outside the EU Commission in Brussels, thank you very much indeed. Well, as those trade tariffs come into effect, we are seeing signs of tension at the White House. Elon Musk, who has called on the president to reverse course on taxes, is now calling the Trump trade advisor, Peter Navarro, a moron who was dumber than a sack of bricks. Navarro is widely seen as the architect behind Trump's trade tariffs. Siobhan Silk tells us more.